The sun had just begun its descent over the vine-covered hills of Napa Valley, casting a soft golden glow over the sprawling estate I'd built with my own 2 hands. The vines, heavy with promise, stretched out toward the horizon, the leaves shimmering under the late afternoon light. My vineyard, my sanctuary, stood untouched by time, the earth beneath it, rich with history, my history. A history that was both my pride and my sorrow. The mansion perched like a crown above the land I'd toiled to cultivate had seen it all. Victories, losses, solitude, and dreams that had come to fruition in the form of this very place. I'd spent years working tirelessly to make this vineyard what it is today. And for all of it, there was no one to share it with, no children to pass it on to, no family to sit across the dinner table from me, laughing about the old days. Just me. Alone. It wasn't always this way. Once I had a family. Once I had Samantha, my bright-eyed daughter, who used to look at me with nothing but adoration. She was everything to me, my reason for everything. But the woman I had poured my love into had drifted away, leaving me to face the bitterness of her absence. I hadn't seen her in years, 10 to be exact. The first cracks in our relationship appeared slowly, like a crack in the foundation of an old house, barely noticeable at first, but deep down I knew it was only a matter of time before it would collapse. I couldn't help but wonder how it had happened, how we had gotten here. I had poured my heart into Samantha, but somewhere along the way, my ambition, my drive to create something lasting had come between us. I thought I was doing it for her, for us, for a future we could share. But when you're too focused on what you're building, you forget to look at who's standing right beside you, holding the pieces together. I'd made choices once I'd regretted. My work was all-consuming, and I thought if I just built enough, if I could just prove to everyone, to Samantha, that I was worthy of being her mother, of being her provider, then everything would fall into place. I thought that if I gave her a life of privilege and comfort, she would see me as her hero. But somewhere in those long hours and those lonely nights spent inspecting the vineyard, signing contracts and negotiating deals, I lost her. It was slow at first, a missed phone call here, a forgotten birthday there. But soon it was a flood of silence. Texts that never came. Calls that never lasted. And eventually, there were no calls at all. She stopped coming home. She stopped answering my messages. She didn't even show up for the holidays anymore. It hurt, but I convinced myself it was just a phase. She was growing up, making her own way. I tried to ignore the hollow feeling that settled in my chest when I realized she was no longer the little girl who would run to me with her scraped knees or call me to tell me about her school projects. I thought that maybe this was how things were supposed to be, an inevitable change as children grew into adults. But it wasn't just growing up. It was abandonment. And it stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. For years, I let the silence fester. I kept busy throwing myself into the vineyard, perfecting my wine hosting grand tasting events, living for the applause of clients and investors, pretending to be content with the solitude that had become my constant companion. But I knew deep down that something was missing. Samantha's absence was the emptiness I had never been able to fill. The space between us had grown into a chasm, one that no amount of success or wealth could bridge. And then, on an ordinary day that felt like any other, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the halls of my mansion like a distant memory I didn't want to remember. When I opened the door there, they were Samantha standing on the threshold with her husband Richard. 10 years had passed since I'd seen them, but in that moment the years seemed to vanish in a rush of emotion. Richard, tall and imposing, stood beside her, his face a mask of discomfort. His eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail, his gaze lingering on the expensive Italian furniture and the panoramic view of the vineyard. I knew that look well. It was the same one he'd always given me, the one that said, "How much can I get from this woman, Samantha?" I whispered, almost afraid to speak her name aloud. There was a hesitation in her eyes, an unease I hadn't seen before. The way she shifted from foot to foot reminded me of the way she used to when she was little, before she became consumed with her new life and left me behind. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling, barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling through the vineyard. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in, the cool breeze from the open door brushing past me like a ghost from the past. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in on me as they crossed the threshold, their presence filling every inch of the space. I offered them seats, the leather sofa gleaming under the soft light, and we all sat in a silence that was suffocating. My mind raced, trying to make sense of why they were here. 10 years without a word from either of them, and now they appeared in my life like specters, haunting, but not welcome. Samantha's eyes were red as if she had been crying, but I knew it wasn't for me. It was for the mess they'd made of their own lives. Richard adjusted his shirt nervously, his gaze flicking to the wine cellar, and I felt a sudden wave of realization flood over me. They hadn't come to reconnect. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come because they needed something, and I knew exactly what it was. I had worked my entire life to build this empire. I had fought tooth and nail for every inch of success, every drop of wine, every vine that had grown on this land. But now I was face to face with the two people who had once meant the world to me, the people I had sacrificed everything for, and I was beginning to understand that they weren't here to rebuild what we had. They were here to take what they could from me. And for the first time in years, I felt my heart harden. The walls I'd built around myself rise higher than they had ever been before. I would listen to them, yes. I would hear what they had to say. But I already knew this wasn't going to be a conversation about healing. It was going to be a negotiation. A negotiation that in the end would leave me with a choice to continue to give, to continue to love unconditionally, or to finally stand up for myself and say enough. As I watched Samantha and Richard sit across from me, their discomfort palpable, I couldn't help but notice how much had changed in the years since we'd last spoken. Samantha, once the bright-eyed girl I had raised with so much love and care, now appeared weary, the glow that once filled her face replaced by the kind of sadness that comes from years of emotional neglect. Her hands, which used to reach out to me for comfort, were now fidgeting in her lap, twisting the hem of her jacket like she didn't know what to do with herself. Richard, on the other hand, had always been a master of control, calm, poised and calculating, but even he seemed unnerved by the weight of the moment. He shifted in his seat, eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to latch onto, but I knew he was only pretending to take in the view. The truth was, he was already mentally assessing how he could use this situation to his advantage. "So what brings you here after all this time?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos that churned within me. My words hung in the air between us, sharp and demanding, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It was as though the question itself had caught them off guard, as if they had expected to come here, make some vague apology, and then move on to the part where they asked for something. Samantha cleared her throat, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like forever. "Mom," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "We know it's been a long time, and I'm sure you have every right to be angry with us. We just wanted to say, we're sorry." I felt the sting of her words, the false sincerity in her voice, but I didn't let it show. I knew she wasn't sorry in the way she needed to be sorry for abandoning me, sorry for the hurt they had caused. No, she was sorry because she needed something, and this was her way of softening me up. The realization hit me like a cold wave, but I kept my composure. "Sorry," I repeated, tasting the word on my tongue. Sorry for what exactly? For not speaking to me for 10 years, for not sending a single message when I needed you, for making excuses every time I tried to reach out. Or maybe you're sorry because I finally stopped begging for your attention. Samantha's eyes welled up with tears, but I wasn't fooled. She was a master at manipulating emotions, a trait I knew she had inherited from Richard. She lowered her gaze, clearly uncomfortable with my directness, but Richard immediately stepped in, his voice smooth and calculated, as though he had rehearsed this moment over and over in his mind. "Delilah, we're not here to dredge up the past," he said, his tone calm but firm. "We know we made mistakes, and we're not asking for forgiveness. We're just asking for a chance to start over. You've always been a big part of Samantha's life, and she needs you now more than ever." I sat back in my chair, my fingers tightening around the stem of my wine glass as I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch between us. It was the kind of silence that could suffocate, the kind that made you aware of every breath, every movement. They were trying to make me feel guilty, trying to make me believe that I was the one standing in the way of some grand reconciliation. But I knew better. "You're right about one thing," I said, slowly setting my glass down. "Samantha does need me. But what I'm not sure of is whether she needs me because she wants to make amends or because she's finally realized she needs someone to fix what's broken in her life." Richard shifted, his gaze hardening, as if he had anticipated this line of questioning and was prepared to deflect it. "We're not here for your charity, Delilah," he said, his voice edged with annoyance. "We've made our mistakes, but we're trying to make it right. Samantha's been struggling with a lot lately, and the kids are confused, and we don't know what to do anymore." I raised an eyebrow, curious but not fooled. "The kids?" I had heard enough about the kids in the last 10 minutes to know exactly how this was going to go. Richard was trying to play the guilt card, the one that always worked with people like me who had spent their lives giving everything to their families, to the people they loved. They were going to use the children, my grandchildren, as the final leverage to get what they wanted. "You want money?" I said, cutting through the veils of their so-called sorrow. "You're not here for my love or my forgiveness. You're here because you've run out of options. You've hit rock bottom, and now all of a sudden you want to pretend like you care about the family you walked away from. But that's not how this works." Samantha's face flushed, her expression shifting from sorrow to something darker, a hint of defensiveness flickering in her eyes. Richard, on the other hand, didn't miss a beat. He straightened up in his seat, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that almost made me recoil. "We're not asking for handouts," he said, his voice dropping to a lower register, as if he were now speaking directly to the core of my emotional defenses. "We just need a little help. You've built this empire, Delilah. You've got more than enough to share. We're family, and family helps each other when times are tough." I felt the familiar stirrings of anger and frustration rise within me. He was so sure of himself, so convinced that I owed them something, because of the ties that once bound us together. But those ties had been severed long ago, and the truth was that they hadn't come back because of love or family. They had come back because they saw me as a lifeline, someone who could bail them out of their mess, family. I said, my voice now icy with the weight of the years of hurt I'd carried. Family doesn't walk away when things get hard. Family doesn't disappear for 10 years and then show up on your doorstep expecting to be welcomed with open arms. Family doesn't use guilt to manipulate people into doing what they want. You want to talk about family? Let's talk about what it means to be a part of one. The room fell into silence, the tension hanging thick in the air. Samantha, who had been on the verge of tears just moments before, was now visibly frustrated. She shifted uncomfortably, her hands wringing in her lap, as if she were searching for something to say. Richard, however, had finally lost his composure. His gaze became cold and his voice sharpened as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Delilah, we don't have time for this," he snapped. "We're not here to relive the past. We're here because we need your help. The house is in foreclosure and the business is bankrupt. We've lost everything, and you're the only one who can fix this. You're the only one who can help us." It was like a punch to the gut, the raw desperation in his voice, the way his words seemed to pierce through the facade of civility we had been trying to maintain. But in that moment, I understood something. I understood that they hadn't come for love. They hadn't come to fix what was broken between us. They had come for money, for security, and for the kind of help they had always assumed I would give, without question. I stood up from my chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the years, the weight of the disappointment, the weight of the trust I had given and lost. I had worked too hard, fought too long to let my past define me, to let people like Richard and Samantha pull me back into a cycle of manipulation and emotional exploitation. "I'm sorry, Samantha," I said, my voice steady, unyielding. "But this time, I'm not going to fix it for you." Her eyes widened as if she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. Richard, too, looked taken aback, his brow furrowing as though he hadn't expected me to resist. This time, I continued my words slow and deliberate. "I'm not going to be your safety net. This time, you're going to have to figure it out on your own, because I've spent too many years trying to save people who didn't want to be saved." With that, I turned and walked away from them, my heart pounding in my chest, but my resolve clear. They had come for money, but they had forgotten something crucial. You can't buy back love, and you certainly can't manipulate someone into giving it. I could hear the sounds of their footsteps trailing behind me as I walked across the room, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The weight of the moment settled like a heavy cloud between us. Samantha and Richard were silent, their presence in the room an unspoken tension that gnawed at the edges of my resolve. I knew that neither of them expected me to react this way. They had thought they could walk in here, speak their rehearsed lines, and somehow guilt me into giving them what they wanted. But the more they tried to manipulate the situation, the more their true intentions became glaringly clear. As I reached the large bay window overlooking the vineyard, I paused, staring out at the rolling hills and the golden hues of the setting sun, feeling the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. The view, so familiar and serene, now felt like a distant memory, a reminder of the life I had built, alone a life that had been marred by the painful decisions I had made for the sake of my family. And yet here, they were standing behind me, pretending that nothing had changed, pretending that they could simply waltz back into my life and erase the years of neglect and abandonment with a few well-placed words. "You're angry," Richard finally spoke, his voice cool and controlled, but there was a subtle edge to it that betrayed his frustration. "I get it. We messed up. We didn't show up when you needed us, but that's in the past. Now we're asking for your help, and that's what matters." I turned to face them, my gaze steady and unflinching. "What matters, Richard, is not what you're asking for. What matters is what you've taken from me. You want money? Fine. But don't pretend that what you really want is anything more than that. You've shown me who you are, and I'm not going to pretend like I don't see through you." Samantha, who had been silent for most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up, her voice cracking with emotion. "Mom, please. We don't know what to do. The kids, they're asking for you. They don't understand why you're not in their lives. They don't understand why they don't have a grandmother." Her eyes filled with tears, and I saw her struggle to hold back the floodgates. "I never meant for this to happen. I didn't realize how much I needed you until now. But everything's falling apart. Richard and we've been fighting nonstop. The business, it's ruined. We have nothing left." I held her gaze, trying to process the words she had just spoken. She was crying now, and for a moment I wondered if any of it was genuine or if it was just another calculated attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. I wanted to reach out to her to comfort her, but I stopped myself. I wasn't the same woman I had been before, the one who would have rushed to her side, forgiving everything because she was my daughter. I had been that woman once, but she had been swallowed by the years of silence. The years of feeling invisible to her. Don't you see I said my voice softer now, but still firm? You've spent all these years thinking I would always be here, that I would always forgive you, that you could keep me at arm's length and when it suited you, come back for whatever you needed. But that's not how this works anymore. Samantha's sobs grew louder, and Richard, who had been standing in the background, took a step forward, his face hardening. Delilah, enough. We've heard your grievances. We've heard the anger, the bitterness, but we're beyond that now. We need to move forward. You're not the only one who's suffered. You think we haven't had our share of pain? I raised an eyebrow, letting the words hang in the air. Pain. You think you've suffered. You've had a comfortable life. You've had opportunities I could only dream of. And yet you chose to ignore me. You chose to let me wither away in silence while you built your life. You think that's pain. Let me tell you something. The pain of being abandoned by your own child is something you'll never understand, Richard. You've spent years making sure Samantha never had to face the consequences of her actions. But now you both want something from me. You want me to step in and clean up your mess, but I'm done being your safety net. Richard took a deep breath. His jaw clenched, and for a moment I saw the mask slip his calculated, cold demeanor faltering as frustration seeped through. You're so self-righteous, he spat, his voice low and dangerous. You act like you're the only one who's ever had it tough. We've had our struggles too, but you... He stopped himself, realizing he had pushed too far, but the damage was already done. I could see the anger in his eyes, now the resentment bubbling up to the surface. This wasn't the man I had once believed I could trust. This wasn't the man who had promised to take care of Samantha. This was a man desperate to protect his own ego, his own financial interests, and he would do anything to keep his power over my daughter. Samantha looked between the two of us, torn, as if she could feel the tension crackling in the air. But there was something different in her now, something I hadn't seen before. A flicker of understanding, a flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong all along. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I can't go back and fix all the years I've missed. But I need you. I need your help. The kids they're growing up without knowing you. They don't have their grandmother. I never realized how much I needed you until now. Her words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I stood there unable to speak. Part of me wanted to reach out, wanted to forgive her, to pull her into my arms and tell her that everything would be okay. But the other part, the part that had spent the last decade grieving and rebuilding, remained firm. It wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. It was about respect. It was about acknowledging the years I had spent on my own, the years I had sacrificed, to give them a life they didn't appreciate. You've never needed me, Samantha. I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You've needed a crutch. You've needed someone to bail you out when things got tough, someone to fix your mistakes. And I've always been there to do that. But not anymore. I'm done being the backup plan. I'm done letting you walk all over me. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing him. I've given everything to you, and this is what I get in return, a sob story about how hard your life is. Let me tell you something, Richard. You're not the one who's suffered the most. You're not the one who has to live with the consequences of your actions. You've made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and for a moment I thought maybe they would leave. Maybe they would finally understand that I wasn't going to fold under their pressure. But instead, Samantha stood up slowly, her tears now drying on her cheeks, and walked toward me. She didn't say anything at first, but when she reached me, she stopped and looked up, her eyes filled with both pain and apology. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly, but I need you to know that I've never stopped loving you. I got lost, and I'm sorry. I stood there facing her, my emotions swirling inside me, but something in her words broke through the walls I had so carefully built. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was a chance for something new, something different. But not today. Not now. I had to make it clear that love wasn't a bargaining chip that respect couldn't be bought. "You don't need forgiveness, Samantha," I said softly. "You need to make better choices. You need to learn to live with the consequences of your actions. Only then will you understand what it means to truly have someone in your life. But that's not something I can give you right now. Not until you prove you're ready." Samantha nodded, a look of genuine remorse crossing her face. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away before she could touch me. There was nothing left to say. The damage had been done, and there was nothing that could erase the past. All I had now was the truth. And the truth was that their presence in my life would no longer be defined by need or manipulation. As they turned to leave, I watched them go, the weight of their departure heavier than I had expected. The door closed softly behind them, and for the first time in years, I felt the quiet of my vineyard settle around me like a protective shield. I was no longer the woman they had left behind. I was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, I was free. I took a deep breath and walked to the window, the sun now dipping below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of crimson and violet. It was beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, it was mine. The sound of the door clicking shut behind them echoed through the vast, empty halls of my home, and I felt the space around me expand in a way that was both comforting and, for a moment, unsettling. The silence that followed was not the quiet of solitude. It was something deeper, something more significant. It was the silence of realization, the kind that sinks in and settles into your bones, leaving you with a profound understanding of exactly what you've lost, what you've gained, and what you've endured. I stood there, my hand still hovering near the door, feeling the weight of the moment as the distant sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs outside mingled with the steady rhythm of my breath. It had been a long time since I had felt the weight of a decision so clearly, so definitively. They had left as I had known they would, and yet a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something fundamental, something irrevocable. They had come as I had always feared, not because they truly wanted to heal our relationship, but because they needed something. I had spent years of my life giving them pieces of myself, pieces I could never get back, believing that they would appreciate it, that they would understand my sacrifices. I had been wrong, and maybe it was time to stop pretending that I didn't see the truth that they were never going to change, that they were never going to see me as anything more than a resource, the truth that all those years of neglect weren't an accident. They were a choice. As I walked back toward the center of the room, I couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. It had always been peaceful here, but this was different. There was no tension, no anticipation hanging in the air. There was no pressure to keep up appearances, no need to pretend that things would ever go back to the way they once were. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I had built this place, this vineyard, brick by brick, vine by vine, and in doing so, I had built a life for myself, a life that didn't rely on anyone else, a life that was my own independent free and no longer bound by the expectations or guilt that had plagued me for so long. But standing there, I couldn't help but feel the sting of the absence that was left in their wake. Not because I missed them, no, not anymore, but because I had once believed in them. Once I had believed that family was the one thing that mattered above all else, that unconditional love would be enough to bind us together. But what I had learned, what I had come to realize over these years of silence and solitude, was that unconditional love means nothing without respect, without trust, without mutual care. I couldn't help but wonder, as the minutes ticked by and the sun began to set beyond the vineyard, if I had been wrong all along. Had I done something wrong? Had I failed them somehow? The self-doubt crept in, like it always did when I was alone, when I had no one but my own thoughts to keep me company. The memories of Samantha, of her laughter and her love, came flooding back, overwhelming me in a way I hadn't expected. I thought back to the days when she was a child, how she had once looked at me with nothing but pure adoration, how she had called me her hero, how she had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Those days seemed like a distant dream now, a world I could never return to. But the truth was, I didn't need to. I had built something greater than I could have ever imagined. And it wasn't just the vineyard, it was the strength I had found within myself to keep going, to keep living, even when everything seemed to fall apart. The phone on the table beside me buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at it, expecting to see another text from Martha or one of the women from the market. But it wasn't. It was a message from Samantha. Mom, I know I can't undo everything, but I hope you'll at least hear me out. Please let me know when you're ready to talk. I love you. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading her words over and over, trying to make sense of them. There was a time when I would have dropped everything and called her, immediately desperate to hear her voice, to know that she still cared. But now, reading her message, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things would go back to how they were before. I had learned that nothing comes without cost. Nothing worth having comes without effort, without time, without trust. And they had lost that. They had chosen to walk away, to leave me behind, and now they were coming back only because they needed something. I didn't reply immediately. I couldn't. The words that I wanted to say to her were trapped somewhere deep inside, and I wasn't sure I was ready to let them out just yet. Instead, I locked the phone and set it down on the table. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to make her understand why I couldn't just forgive her, why I couldn't let them back into my life. They had taken enough from me over the years, and now I was done. I walked over to the window and looked out at the horizon, the golden light of the setting sun reflecting off the vineyards, casting long shadows across the rows of vines. The world felt still, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to make this decision. And now that I had, the air seemed to clear. The weight on my chest lightened. I wasn't just standing here alone in this grand house. I was standing in my truth. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt that I had carried for years. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I wasn't missing them anymore. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, and I had done it without them, without their approval, without their presence. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Samantha. I let it ring for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to the living room and poured myself a glass of wine, the deep red liquid swirling in the glass as I took a sip. The taste was familiar, comforting, and for a moment, I let myself savor it, letting the warmth spread through me, reminding me of the simple pleasures I had learned to cherish in these last few months. The sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore, the scent of the earth, the taste of wine that I had made with my own hands, these were the things that had become my life. These were the things that mattered. I went to the window again and stared out at the landscape, watching the sun sink lower into the horizon, casting the world in shades of pink and purple. I had made it. I had survived, and I was no longer willing to let anyone dictate how my story would end. The doorbell rang again, but this time I didn't move to answer it. This time I stayed where I was, looking out at the vineyard, knowing that I had everything I needed right here. I wasn't afraid anymore. The knock came again, and again I didn't move. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in dusky purples and fiery oranges, casting the world in a soft, ethereal glow. The vineyard before me seemed almost otherworldly, its rows of vines stretching out into the distance, the earth beneath them rich with history. It was my world now. The quiet hum of the ocean crashing against the cliffs in the distance felt like a lullaby, a sound that had become a constant companion in my newfound life. My hands, once calloused from years of neglect and emotional labor, now held a glass of red wine with a calm, steady grip. I swirled the liquid, watching as it swam inside the glass, the deep burgundy a reflection of the depth of change I had undergone over the past few months. The phone buzzed again, its familiar chime cutting through the peaceful silence. Samantha's name flashed across the screen. She had called twice already, leaving a voicemail each time, and now she was trying once more. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of her presence on the other side of the line, both a temptation and a reminder. A temptation to give in to hear her voice, to pretend like nothing had changed between us. A reminder of everything I had sacrificed for this very moment, the moment I realized that my peace, my autonomy, and my dignity were not negotiable. I set the phone down without answering. It felt like the right choice, even though a part of me ached at the thought of her reaching out again. She was my daughter, after all, my flesh and blood. The same child who once ran to me with scraped knees, the same child who had called me her hero. But that was a long time ago. In the years that had passed, something had shifted between us. The love I had once given so freely, so willingly, had become a tool for manipulation. And now, standing on the precipice of my new life, I knew I couldn't afford to let that happen again. I had been raised to believe that family was everything, that the bonds of blood were unbreakable, that unconditional love was supposed to come without question. But now I knew better. Family was not a guarantee of loyalty, of love, or of respect. Samantha had spent years abandoning me, choosing her own life, her own family, and ultimately her own ego over the woman who had given everything for her. Richard, too, had played his part, manipulating her to create a wedge between us, making sure I was erased from her life, his influence slowly eating away at the woman I had raised. For so long, I had thought that this would be my greatest regret, that my family would eventually come back, realizing their mistakes, and that I would be waiting with open arms to welcome them. I had imagined that someday they would recognize the value of what they had lost, and that I would be there, ready to forgive, ready to embrace them once more. But as I stood at the window, watching the last remnants of daylight fade away, I understood that it was not forgiveness they sought. It was something far more selfish. It was not love they were asking for, but a bailout. They were asking for a second chance, not because they had learned anything, but because they had nowhere else to turn. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, like the sea breeze that fluttered through the open window. I had already made my decision, and no amount of guilt or manipulation would change it. Samantha, Richard, they would have to figure things out on their own. I had given them all I could. Now it was my turn to take care of myself. The phone buzzed again, and this time I glanced at the screen. It was another message from Samantha, her words short and direct. "I don't know what you want from me, Mom, but I'm sorry. I really am." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I could have responded. I could have told her that I understood, that I forgave her, that we could start fresh. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized that responding wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to let go. What I needed was to stop waiting for a redemption that might never come, to stop giving energy to a relationship that had been drained by years of neglect. I locked the phone and set it back down, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. I had learned that I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I didn't need to apologize for choosing my peace over my family's emotional manipulation. I didn't need to prove my love for them because I had already given it, and they had chosen to walk away from it. I had done my part. I had loved unconditionally, and I had been left behind, and now it was time to move forward. I stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and the moon cast a silver light over the vineyard, making it look almost magical. I breathed in deeply, taking in the scent of the earth, the salt of the ocean, the life that surrounded me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The vineyard had become my sanctuary, my refuge from the storm that had once been my family. Behind me, the house stood in silence, its grand walls a testament to my hard work and resilience. It was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had fought, for everything I had built on my own. And standing there under the vast sky, I realized that I didn't need anyone to validate my existence. I had found my own worth. I had learned to love myself again, to see the strength within me that I had forgotten all those years ago. I wasn't defined by my family's abandonment. I wasn't defined by their need for me. I was defined by who I had become in their absence. The decision was final. I wasn't going to answer their calls. I wasn't going to reach out to them. I wasn't going to beg for their affection or forgiveness anymore. I had spent so many years wishing for a reunion that would never come, dreaming of a world where everything would go back to normal. But normal had never existed. The normal I had imagined was a lie. I had to stop living in the past, stop holding on to hope for something that wasn't meant to be. Instead, I decided to embrace the life I had created. I turned away from the balcony, walking back into the house with a sense of purpose, a sense of self-assurance that I had never known before. I poured myself another glass of wine and walked into the living room where a fire crackled softly in the hearth. I sank into the armchair by the fire. My body finally relaxed, my mind finally at peace. The phone buzzed once more, and this time I didn't look at it. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I had learned that I didn't need to care about everything. Not anymore. My life was mine, and that was all that mattered. I had let go of the past, of the pain of the expectations. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's approval. I was enough just as I was. The fire burned steadily, casting shadows across the room, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of contentment. The world outside was vast and uncertain, but here in this space I had built, I was free. Free from the weight of guilt, free from the burden of unmet expectations, free from the people who had never valued me. And as I sat there surrounded by the life I had created, I knew that I was finally truly free. The doorbell rang once again, but this time I didn't move to answer it. I knew who it was. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had chosen peace, and nothing could take that away from me. I closed my eyes, leaned back in the chair, and let the warmth of the fire wrap around me, knowing that I had made the right choice. The right choice for me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at home. I want to share something with all of you that has been a turning point in my life. Sometimes the hardest, most painful decisions are the ones that set you free. For years, I held on to the idea that family love and loyalty were everything. I sacrificed my own peace, my own happiness trying to fix relationships that were broken beyond repair. But here's the truth I've learned. You can't change people who don't want to change. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. Let go of the guilt, the expectations, and the idea that you have to save everyone. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you're choosing yourself. It's about building a life that you don't need to apologize for, a life where your happiness is your responsibility and your peace is non-negotiable. If you're in a situation where you feel like you've been giving so much of yourself to others, whether it's family, friends, or anyone who doesn't appreciate, that you have the power to take your life back. You deserve to be loved and respected for who you are, not for what you give. You deserve to walk away from toxicity, no matter how difficult it seems. Trust yourself, trust the process, and know that your worth is not tied to the approval of others. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved for the sake of your own peace? How did it feel, and what did you learn from it? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Thank you for reading my story, and I hope it inspires you to live with the confidence and freedom you deserve. Thank you again for taking the time to connect. I appreciate each and every one of you.